Notre Dame fans, welcome to a special edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. My name is Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher at irishbreakdown.com. And we are now at 5 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. It is St. Patrick's Day. It has been a very, very busy day for Notre Dame and Notre Dame recruiting. Today, we had the Pots of Gold going out. That was basically Notre Dame's social media push for 2021, 2023 prospects. Ton of offers to some of the nation's best players. We talked about that. But, of course, we're here now to prepare for the commitment announcement of 2022 linebacker Josh Burnham. He is going to make his decision sometime around 5:15, we're told. He is going to pick between Notre Dame, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So what we're going to do here leading up to that, we are going to talk a little bit about Josh Burnham. We're going to go over some film. I'm going to show you what I like about him. We're going to talk about him, talk a little bit of recruiting, answer some of your questions until we get to that moment. Then when he is set to announce, we will go live to that. Eric Rutter, our new recruiting analyst at irishbreakdown.com, just pulled up to that event. He is getting set up. He will live stream from there. And then, of course, he will interview Josh after that announcement. So let's first talk a little bit about Josh Burnham. So this has been an interesting recruitment. He was a guy that Notre Dame's always been involved in. They've been listed as one of his top schools for a while. They had a shot. Clark Lee started recruiting him. They offered him when Clark Lee was still here. And he was a guy that Notre Dame was always going to be, a top 3 or 4 program with. When Marcus Freeman showed up, things really kind of went to the next level with him. I think that there was a connection there with Marcus Freeman. I think Notre Dame has become a really just hot program on the recruiting trail under Marcus Freeman. There's a lot of excitement with people about what he could possibly do at Notre Dame, and he's got that personality that connects. I think the other thing that factored in too is obviously what's going on at Michigan. Since their season was over, they fired their defensive coordinator, Don Brown, and they've had almost a complete overhaul of the defensive staff. And I think that is where, should he pick Notre Dame, there's a lot of Michigan reporters saying that Michigan's going to be on him and they're going to try to flip him. And that's true. They're going to try to flip him. They're going to stay on him. So this is a young man that Notre Dame is going to have to stay involved with until the very end, just to make sure, you can't get him into class and then back down or back off, because Michigan is certainly not going to back off. But this is a very, very talented football player, and it makes sense why Notre Dame is going after him, even in a year that's absolutely loaded with linebackers. This is a great, great linebacker class nationally. And I think that's why it's so important for Notre Dame to really hit it in this class. They've got to be successful in linebacker recruiting this class, because they struck out in 2020. They only signed 2 linebackers last year. As far as I know, only one of them is going to be on campus when this thing gets going. So, and that would be Prince Kollie, because I'm still expecting, until things change, I'm expecting that Kahanu Kia is going to take a mission. So it's a big year at linebacker. Notre Dame already has Nolan Ziegler in the class. It's kind of interesting. Nolan Ziegler, who grew up a Notre Dame fan, that was a no-brainer. Josh Burnham grew up a Michigan fan. They both have a St. Patrick's Day birthday, as does Logan Diggs, the 2021 signee at running back. So let's dive a little bit into, as we kind of wait. Let me actually get a question here real quick before we get going. Dylan Hoffman asks, to me, it seems that Freeman does a nice job of being involved in all the recruits on D, regardless of position. Do you feel Tommy Rees needs to be more involved in the recruits on offense, or is he already? Yes, Marcus Freeman is incredibly involved with all the recruits on defense. I mean, we constantly hear his name mentioned. It's, here's my position coach, and then, oh, yeah, and by the way, Coach Freeman. I actually like what Tommy Rees is doing, with the exception of quarterback. I didn't like how Notre Dame handled that. I'm somewhat understanding of it, because it's not a great quarterback class, and he didn't get a chance to see a lot of those guys. But other than that, I think Tommy Rees has been very involved with the offensive staff. I don't think that the issues that Notre Dame is having on getting top players in the 2022 class on offense are because Tommy Rees isn't working. I think that there's some other issues, and we can get into that. We're going to have a live mailbag on Friday. Feel free to ask that one. But I would say Tommy Rees is another guy that we hear mentioned with a lot of the offensive players. So Frank Anthony says Notre Dame needs this guy. It's a big pickup. It's an important pickup. He's going to be a key ingredient to Notre Dame having a top linebacker class. So they're in great shape going into this announcement. But as you guys know, it's with anything, you got to finish. They got to finish with this one. Couple other recruiting questions or comments. Dylan Bennett says, excited for where this class could go, and even more so for 2023, considering the push we are giving. Have to think coaches have been listening to your podcast. I don't think they've been listening to my podcast, and if they do, it's not for advice. I think what this is this is a lot about Mike Elston. And there's an article at irishbreakdown.com where I talk about this. I think Mike Elston, since he's been promoted to recruiting coordinator, it was a very overlooked announcement because it was at that same time. It was like after Marcus Freeman got hired, they were able to keep Mike Elston on staff. They had Brian Pulling was the recruiting coordinator. Mike Elston was the associate head coach. They switched those roles, and now Mike Elston is the recruiting coordinator. And I think a lot of this is about Mike Elston. It's about him saying, look, we got to take that next step. We've got to get over that final hump. And, he's been here from the beginning. I believe he's the only assistant coach left that's been here from the beginning. And he knows where they've been. He knows where they need to get to. And I think this push is a lot about him. And I think, obviously Marcus Freeman coming on and Mike Mickens, you've got a really good young defensive staff. But this ultimately is about making a commitment to getting involved with recruits earlier. And Brian Kelly's been, look, I've been crushing Brian Kelly on recruiting for years. And he deserved it, in my opinion. But look, we're constantly over the last month, we've been hearing Brian Kelly's on a Zoom with this kid. He's on a Zoom with that kid. He's reaching out to this kid. He's talking to this 2022 kid, this 2023 kid. Those are great signs. Those are great signs. And if he can continue this moving forward, those are the things that Notre Dame needs to do to take that next step. So right now, I'm very encouraged with how things are going. And I think offensively, they got to finish better, but there's still some names on the board there. So I like where this is going, and if tonight goes the way that Notre Dame hopes it's going to go, and Josh Burnham ends up announcing for Notre Dame, then that's just another step to what it has the makings to be a really good front seven class for Notre Dame. Before I ask a few more questions, I'm going to let's look at some film of right now of Josh Burnham. So here's some highlights of him. The thing that you got to watch about him is, first of all, great size, great length, 6'4", 215, very athletic. And what you're going to see from this film is very good short area quickness, really good feet, very good closing ability. But what you're also going to see is a young linebacker that still is very much learning how to play the game. Everything he's doing right now in these first four clips, let's go back and look at those again. He's number 8 on defense. A lot of what he's doing is just God-given ability and instincts. His technique is not great. He's a guy that plays quarterback on offense. We'll get to that. He's played some running back. He catches some passes. Everything he does is just because he's incredibly athletic and instinctive. And I think those are things that you look at and you say, the technique, you can teach that. What you can't teach is 6'4", 215 and a kid that can move like he moves at 6'4", 215. And as you can see from these highlights, this is a very naturally athletic player. Look at that short area burst right there. This is kind of what I'm talking about. Very nimble, light on his feet. Look at that. Look at that lateral. He plants on that right foot and just takes off, and then boom, he is downhill in a hurry. You really see the athleticism and quickness. Watch this speed, closing ability. He's got some punch. There's just a lot to like about Josh Burnham athletically. And again, as a coach, you look at this kid, look at this closing speed right here. There you go. What you look at as a coach is you say, look, I get paid a lot of money to teach technique, to teach assignment correctness, to teach here's how you line up. You're an inside hip of the guard or on this play, or you got to line up on an outside shade of our 3 technique on this play. You can teach all those things. What you want to have is you want to have the elite tools. And then we're going to see a little bit of him on offense now. So you have to really like what's going on here. Just going to check here as we're going through this, making sure that, let's see where Eric's at. Eric Rudder, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be at this announcement. So we're going to get that pulled up here soon as he's ready to go. He threw for, I think I saw 1,200 yards. He had about 900 passing yards. Here's a nice play. He's going to bounce this one outside. You're going to see some speed. Really good toughness. Look at that strength. And if you want to see some athleticism, go watch some of his basketball highlights. You're going to see a kid there's a clip from his most recent game. Look at that toughness where he takes 2 steps and just goes up, rises up, and just 2-hand jams on somebody in a game. I'm not talking like out playing with his friends. I'm talking about for his high school basketball team. He had 16 points and 12 rebounds the other night. Just a really, really athletic player. Really like his athleticism. And I like guys that you guys all know this. You all know this. I love guys that play both ways. And obviously, as you're seeing here, he's a 2-way player. Really good player. He played mostly running backs as a sophomore. This is a linebacker. This is a 6'4", 215-pound linebacker moving like that. So there's just a lot to like here. And I think you all are seeing just the athleticism that I'm talking about. Look at that change of direction right there. Look at that foot quickness. Watch that bounce. It may not, it's just kind of, it's so fluid and natural that you really don't even notice when he's doing it. But watch this cut right here. He's going straight, and then just watch this outside bounce. Just watch this. This is right there. And just natural, and then he explodes. Look at him get to full speed. Look at that long stride. That's a really, really impressive athletic move right there. And on offense is when you really see the athleticism take off, because that's where right now he's more comfortable. Just athletically, just get that ball in his hands and go do something with it. There's really a lot to like there when it comes to his ability to be a playmaker on offense from a high school standpoint. So again, like I said, I really like what he does athletically. Just connecting with Eric here real quick, seeing where he's at. Just seeing if he's ready to launch yet. But I really like what he brings to the table. Let's get back to some questions here as we wait. Brandon Fry asks, do you think we have any chance with Arch Manning? No. But if you want to know an elite 2023 quarterback, I think Notre Dame will have a chance with, watch the film of Dante Moore. He is really, really good. Just got a note from Eric. He said, we're getting ready to go live here, so I'm going to get that going, and we'll see. We'll kind of see where things go. So here's Thomas Walsh asks, is Burnham an example of Notre Dame going after more athletic linebackers? Yeah, I think Clark Lee went after athletic linebackers. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think Notre Dame's been going after athletic linebackers for a while now. I think it's just about closing. I think Burnham is an example of Notre Dame being able to close on athletic linebackers. We're going to take it to the live stream here. So let's see if we got this rolling yet. Looks like Josh Burnham is at the podium, but we are paused right now. Let's get this back going. I'm going to try this again. All right, just give me a quick heads up. Can you all hear that? And just let him know. All right, so we're going to keep talking about him right now while we wait on this thing to get going. Yeah, so Thomas, the issue with Clark Lee was never about whether or not he was going after athletic linebackers. Look at Prince Colley. Look at the 2019 class that had Maris Luafau, and it had Shane, Osita Ekwonu. I mean, that was a class that certainly had plenty of athletic players. It's just about finishing and getting those guys to commit. That's going to be the key for Notre Dame is getting over the top, is doing that, is closing up the deal. Let's see if there's we frozen again. All right, still nothing. All right, he says he's having a quick problem now, but he's fixing it. So we'll keep trying to figure this out, y'all. So Josh is set up, so he is going to be making his announcement here very soon. All right. All right, so we'll get this. We get a little technical problem. Need to let Eric know. And we'll get this going. I apologize to you all. And yeah, so we'll take that out of there for now until we get that thing figured out. So again, after this is over, we'll provide analysis of what this means for Notre Dame, positively, negatively. If they get them, we'll talk about what it means. If they don't get them, we'll talk about kind of what they got to do now to recover. So those are going to be the keys. Here we go. All right, let's try this again. Here we go. All right. All right, so let's get this back in there. Just give me 1 second, y'all. Okay, make sure we have sound this time. All right, so can y'all hear? He's not talking yet. He's just kind of talking right now. Can barely hear it. It's raining, so that rain is drowning out some of the sound. All right. This is, again, the commitment announcement for Josh Burnham. Sound isn't great right now. It's raining a lot there in Michigan, so it's kind of rain and sleet and snow a little bit. So there's sound. It's just it's hard to hear. I'm trying to get it fixed right now. Can you guys at least hear the rain? Yeah, okay. So you can hear it. It's just quiet. Yeah. Trying to get that fixed. Sorry, just as soon as Caleb Collins said that, I just started thinking of a Creedence Clearwater song. Brandon Fry, I see your question about recruits that Notre Dame offer. Do you think they have a good shot at? We'll have some stuff on that here in the upcoming weeks. A lot of the guys they have a good shot at, they've already offered. But we'll have some more on that here over the next several days. It looks like he just wants to get it over with. He's got mom, dad, and sister up there on the stage with him. I believe that's his sister. All right, not sure what we're waiting on. All right, so as I said, we will talk about this, what this analysis means. We'll answer questions. We'll dive into this. I'm going to have Brian Smith on after his announcement to talk about what that means. We'll have John Garcia from SL American on tomorrow to talk about Josh Burnham and some other recruiting news, some recruiting prospects for Notre Dame. So we'll have a lot for you. See, this is why he needs to pick Notre Dame, because it's cold and snowy and rainy there, but it's beautiful and sunny. Cold, but beautiful and sunny in South Bend today. I'm just kidding. No, it is really nice in South Bend, but Tommy, be nice. Get all the equipment out in a rainy day. You kidding me? I can't afford that. All right, so we're still waiting here. This is good. Little face paint. He looked like Latimer from the program. His size is a little bit more natural than Latimer from the program. That's good. It looks like we're getting ready to get started.
feed online, so anybody that wanted to do their phone can log into CBS Sports Live and actually be able to hear a lot of this that's happening.
What are they showing now?
So I guess we're waiting on CBS Sports apparently to do this. Figures. Get some program references today. I like it. I like it. I was always a Joe Kane guy myself, minus the drinking problem. Always favor the quarterbacks. What I want to know is how Alvin Mack was a killer linebacker there, but then he was a wide receiver who couldn't catch at his other football movie. No politics, Frank. No, necessary roughness is when he was the receiver who couldn't catch. With the Scott Bakula from Quantum Leap. Latimer was also in that movie. He was the rodeo guy. So he was in. They were both in both of those football movies back in the 90s. He's talking now, so turn your volume up.
Lastly, all you teammates, I wouldn't be here without you guys. I appreciate it. And with that being said, I'd like to continue my athletic and academic career at the University of Notre Dame.
Yeah! There it is.
Woo! Yeah!
So Josh Burnham has committed to the University of Notre Dame. Notre Dame now has 11 commitments in the class. There he is rocking the hat. He's got his Notre Dame gear.
I don't know what she said. All I said she's still waiting at the gym. So. I love it. Sorry, Nick.
See, he's gonna ask him, get some pictures taken, probably ask some questions. So let's dive into this. Let's talk a little bit about Josh Burnham picking Notre Dame. This is obviously let me just tweet this out real quick. All right, so that is a big pickup for Notre Dame. The Irish score big with one of the nation's best linebackers, in my opinion. One of the most raw, but tremendous ceiling with Josh Burnham, as we've talked about. Very long, very athletic. He's kind of that guy that, minus the technical advancement, he's kind of what you want in a modern day linebacker. He can line up inside. He's got the size and thump to play in at the Mike or Will position. He is a guy that, in my view, has the kind of range you want to play in coverage at a place like Notre Dame. There's really just there's nothing physically that he can't do. And he's just everything you want in a modern linebacker. I think he can rush the quarterback. I think he's a guy that, in my opinion, can play. He can blitz inside. He can rush the quarterback on the outside. We've had some people bring up, like, what if he keeps growing? Could you put him on the outside and play him as a Viper? Potentially, if he keeps growing and keeps developing. Absolutely. He's got that kind of athleticism, but this is a really athletic, mobile player, and this is the kind of guy you want at a place like Notre Dame. So this is a big pickup for the Irish. Big pickup for the Irish. And yeah, Tommy asks right here. So who is his? Is this a needle mover? In my opinion, yeah, this is a needle mover. This is a moving pickup. If you want some other thoughts, if you want to read my thoughts, I also have a class impact and a commit story on irishbreakdown.com, but we're going to talk about it here. So let's do that. But look, Tommy, what I consider a needle mover linebacker is a guy that look, it's about athleticism, right? It's about playmaking. It's about impact skills. And to me, Josh Burnham has all the physical tools you want. He's got the size, he's got the range, he's got the athleticism, he's got all the traits. He just has to learn how to play the position a little bit, and I think that'll come. I mean, that's the easy part. If that's all a guy is missing, that's the easy part. That's the stuff that you can. That's what you get paid to teach. That's what you get paid to coach, right? What you can't coach is you can't coach 6'4". You can't coach incredibly long arms. You can't coach quickness and speed and athleticism and just that natural pop that he has when he strikes. And you can't teach that natural football instincts that he has. And that's what you look for. It's not about being a top 100 guy. Kenny Moore says, this is a clear top 100 talent, phenomenal pickup. I agree completely. But to me, it's not so much where a guy is ranked now. As you guys that have followed me long enough know, you guys and ladies who followed me long enough know, I don't really care so much about where a guy is ranked. I care about what kind of upside he has. That's why when Notre Dame landed Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, we thought it was such a big deal because you just saw the upside and the talent there, and he's turned out to be that. And then we said the same thing when Notre Dame signed Isaiah Foskey. And Josh Burnham is to me kind of from that Isaiah Foskey school of recruit, in that he's not a guy that's going to, in my opinion, step on the field day one and be a Manti Te'o type difference maker. He's a guy that's going to need more time. He's going to need a year or two to get in the weight room, to learn the technique, to have the overall skill set that you need to be an impact player, but the tools are there. And to me, that's the important thing. Does he have the tools or not? And I think he's got all the tools to be a difference maker. There's no question about it. Let's see. Here we go. Should put Notre Dame in the top 2 for now. I believe I've seen some people say that in the 247 composite rankings that this would put Notre Dame up to number 2. They were number 1 at one point in time last year. So let's not forget that. But I think that the difference is last year at this time, they had loaded up already on the guys that would end up being their best players, with the exception of Rocco Spindler and Prince Colley. Most of the guys that they were going to get, they had already got. I mean, they already had Tyler Buckner in the class. They already had Blake Fisher in the class. They already had, a lot of their Deion Colsey in the class. They already had Lorenzo Styles in the class. So, I mean, most of their top players they got early. In this class, however, I think when you look at where Notre Dame is at, many of the top players that I think they're still going to get are still on the board. So I do think there's more room, in my opinion, for Notre Dame to be able to really add to what's already considered a highly ranked class, especially on defense. Last year, the last 2 years were more defensive dominant or offensive dominant classes. These two classes are more – this class is going to be hopefully more defensive driven is the goal. So that's what I think Notre Dame is trying to do. That's what they need to add, and it's really important that they get that point. Somebody asked, who is his primary recruiter? Clark Lee started this one. So you have to give Coach Lee a lot of credit for initially getting Notre Dame in the mix on this one. But of course, Marcus Freeman, when he arrived, became sort of took that over. And I think he took it over the top for him. So a lot of excitement here about this commitment. Alex Patey, obviously, let's go, baby. Nathan Mayel. So a lot of excitement about this. This is a big pickup. John A1, see you're in here. Here's a question from Dylan Hoffman. You think he's going to be a Mike? Does that depend on Tuihalamaka? I think he can play either or. And I think that yes, I think who they sign with him, if they get Junior Tuihalamaka, he's the Mike. And I think that Josh Burnham becomes the Will. And I think right now he's kind of a Will Sam linebacker. Because remember, when they go to the 3-3-5, they don't necessarily move the rover inside. They're going to have a third linebacker. At least that's what they did a lot of the time at Cincinnati. Their 3-3-5 was a third linebacker. Now they could move the rover inside and have a safety out there, but I think we might see where they're actually in 3-4 personnel. So you might see a true Sam linebacker. And I think that's where Josh Burnham gives you that versatility, because I think he could play all three of those inside linebacker spots, which are the Sam, Mike, and the Will. The rover, I don't think he's a rover. That's, to me, more Nolan Ziegler and Prince Collie. So, Dylan, I do think he can play Mike. I think that he also could rush off the edge in some third down situations as he continues to develop as well. So that is certainly only adds to his value. Again, you guys know this. I love versatile players. I love guys who can play all over the field. I love guys who can do different positions, and he is kind of a he is that kind. Again, we talked about this needle mover. You're going to hear me use this phrase, the two phrases you're going to hear me use constantly between now and signing day. Is this guy a needle mover? Does this close the gap? And to me, Josh Burnham is one of those close the gap kind of guys. He is the kind of guy that, in my opinion, gets you a step closer to being that kind of program that can beat an Ohio State, can beat an Alabama, can beat a Clemson. Not just get to the stage where you're playing them and then losing, but actually competing with those. Yeah, it says great Northern Michigan kid. Great Northern Michigan kid. I guarantee he hunts and fishes as well. I used to recruit Michigan a lot. The last place I coached, and based on my experience, there's a good chance that yes, he is a hunting and a fishing type of player. So it would not shock me at all. So we're gonna continue this. I'm gonna try to get Brian Smith here into this podcast. If you guys have some questions about this young prospect, let me know. This is like I said, this is a big pickup. Notre Dame, in my opinion, needs minimum 3 linebackers in this class. I'd like to see him get 4. I think with the fact that they completely struck out in 2019 or 20 at linebacker, and with the numbers being on the shorter end last year, I really think that 4 is needed, and this gets you halfway there. And if to meet the minimum requirement of 3, they're 2/3 of the way there. So, I think this is a big commitment. So somebody asked if this is a Leighton Vander Esch comp. I think this is more of an inside backer. I think that's the guy at the Cowboys, right? That played at Boise State. I'd have to watch more of him to really feel comfortable with that. I always kind of viewed him as more of an outside linebacker kind of guy. I think Josh is a little bit rangier. I think similar body type, 6'4" long, but I think Josh is more of a pure off-ball linebacker in my view. But I'd have to go back and watch him a little bit more. The kid with the Cowboys now. So let's bring Brian Smith on, who is from SI All-American, also contributes to Irish Breakdown. Brian, thanks for joining us, man. How are you?
Doing all right, man. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. So let's dive right into it, Brian. Notre Dame goes up into Michigan, beats the Wolverines for a kid that grew up as a Wolverine fan, which from a fan standpoint, you got to love that. So let's dive right into it, Brian. What kind of pickup is this for Notre Dame? Talk to me about just the impact that this commitment has for Notre Dame from a ranking standpoint and then from a talent on your roster standpoint.
The first thing I like about him is his ability to play multiple positions. As you and I have talked about him several times in the last few months, he plays quarterback for his high school team. He's a linebacker. He could be a D-end, could be a tight end. Versatility sells. To me, he's at least a 4-star recruit, but I know the hard part with him is he has to play positions that he wouldn't play at Notre Dame, Michigan, etc. His high school team is in Northern Michigan. But his versatility, to me, makes him a very, very prosperous guy for Notre Dame. They can fill him in at so many different spots. He has the athleticism to play on third downs in a passing situation, which most linebackers do not, because he could really, really run. And finally, he's a kid that's physical. So to me, he's a top 200 kid nationally. But, everybody's got their own opinion. And he is a little more difficult to grade because, like I live in Tampa, there's a lot of guys that are athletic. He would be in a different situation down here. He'd actually be able to play like one spot at a high school. But I would take him if I was Alabama, if I was Texas, if I was any program. So huge pickup for the Irish.
Let's talk a little bit about why it's so important to have versatile players, because right now we live in an era with the way that teams substitute that you see it in the NFL. It's sub packages. You've got your nickel on third down. You've got it. When you play teams that are up tempo, you can't always sub. And when you have to sub, it limits what you do out of that substitution package. So getting players, if you have 2 to 3 linebackers that can do a lot of things, can cover, can play the run and rush the quarterback, then you don't have to sub out 3, 4, 5 guys on third down. It is so important to be able to match up, to have versatile players. The other aspect of it, Brian, as you know, is it allows you to be able to match up against different types of offenses. You can match up against the USC, who's going to be a 3-3-5. You want to line up in that. They're going to throw it all over the field. Running is an afterthought. And then, 2 weeks before that, you're playing Wisconsin, who's going to run 2, 3 tight ends and a fullback. To be able to match up against all those players, you need guys that can do different things, line up in different places. And as you mentioned, that's certainly something that Josh Burnham brings from a skill set standpoint, something he brings to the table.
What I like about him and why I like linebackers in his mold, let's say you play Wisconsin. They obviously have a talented quarterback now, finally, a guy that they were really excited about all the way through, etc. Now, let's be honest, Wisconsin's a power team. They're always going to be a power team. But that doesn't mean they can't bring out 3 tight ends and then go split them out. Mm-hmm. This is the kind of kid that can play in space against a tight end or a big receiver and at least be competitive. That's not always the case with Notre Dame. And Notre Dame's improved athletically, leaps and bounds. We know that. Obviously, a certain guy that wore number 6 last year for Notre Dame was a little different. But that's the exception for anybody, not just Notre Dame. You're not going to have guys that are linebackers that can cover like a corner very often. That's once every 20 years. This kid can at least be competitive against a tight end, a big receiver, and can cover in the flat against a running back. And it could be 3rd down and 1. It could be 3rd down and 8. He's still comfortable in his own skin. Because when you're running against tempo, you got to run pretty generic packages as a rule, as a defense, or you're just gambling and blitzing, depending on who you are. He can do any of those. So Notre Dame doesn't have to worry about getting him out of the game before a series. If it's going to be a passing situation, do we want him in there? It doesn't matter. He's good to go. That's very, very important for any team. Like, look at Alabama the last several years. They have stunk in 3rd down situations over the middle in particular. I know Nick is adjusted offensively. Defensively, he hates not having big linebackers on the field. He hates it. It's just not who he is. It drives him bananas. Right. This kid would fit in there and play better than most of their guys have, many of which are ranked higher at inside linebacker because he can cover. And that's just something that's so valuable. And Notre Dame finally is getting those guys year after year. Their depth at linebacker is pretty good, but we had a little lull there in recruiting. They're making up for it in this class, and he's a guy that can play. I think Will or Mike. I'm curious to what you think about that. I think he could play either one of them just fine.
I think he can play both of those, Brian. I also think he can play the Sam spot when they go to the 3-3-5 look. I think he can play all those spots. And you talk about the athleticism. I believe that, and we've talked enough off the air. I know that you agree with me, but to me, like Drew White, for example, Drew White is a very athletic linebacker. Jeremiah Wusu's an incredibly athletic linebacker. The difference is between that and what Notre Dame has signed so far in the 2022 class is they came in a 6 foot and a 6'1" package.
Correct.
Nolan Ziegler and Josh Burnham, and even to a degree Prince Collie, who's 6'2" plus, these are coming in even longer packages. And that's important because a 4'6" that's 6 foot with shorter arms and a 4'6" that's 6'4" with longer arms is going to be different. It is. And that, to your point, that's that matchup part. You don't want to get Drew White necessarily against a team that like Wisconsin, like you talked about, if you're covering tight ends against their 6'4", 6'5" tight ends, you don't necessarily love that Mike linebacker matchup with Drew White, who's 6 foot with kind of short arms, even though he's very athletic. And that's where that pass game aspect comes into play. Whereas Josh Burnham, Nolan Ziegler, these are 6'4", long-limbed players that can run with these tight ends, can run with running backs, but also have the size to strike and play in the box, because Notre Dame's still going to play enough teams that you need to be able to strike in the box and shut down the run to be successful.
Well, they play Stanford every year. That alone means a guy like Drew White will always have a home. And like you said, Drew is not the longest guy in the world, but he's so instinctive, it's insane. Against the run, he's as good an inside linebacker as there is in the country. Where teams will get after him is in the pass game. It's not any newsflash. And if I'm Wisconsin, I would try to expose him. I know he's savvy and he knows how to position himself and he's well coached. But if he's 6'4", he's going to make more plays. It's just math. Urban Meyer talked about it all the time. It's just math, speed, size, length, etc. That's how he kind of recruited. And obviously it worked out pretty well. Well, that's what most teams do now. Everything's measurables. For every Drew White, you still need a guy that's 6'3" to 6'5", playing inside or outside linebacker to kind of tip the scales in your favor. The offense knows where the ball's going. The defense does not. Therefore, you got to make up for it with length and speed and athleticism. The more of those guys that you have that you can rotate in, the more likely you are to be successful, especially in the fourth quarter. If you're in a shootout with a high-ranking team like the USC, you need guys that can play right off the bench, that can go in there, and even if they don't really know the scheme dead set, they're a tremendous athlete, and they can make up for it with just raw skill. This is the kind of kid that can do that. Notre Dame can't get enough of these guys. He's a great player.
Now, when you talk about kind of where we see this linebacker class moving forward, Brian, let's talk about kind of what's next at linebacker. We talked about his versatility. I think he is a Will Mike Sam. I think Nolan Ziegler is a rover that will maybe eventually grow into a Will. When you look at the rest of the board, this is a great linebacker class nationally, I believe. Yeah. Who are the guys that you look at and you say, Notre Dame's got to get at least one of this group, and who would be the guy that you would point to? I know who I want, and it's a kid from out west that reminds me a lot of a former Notre Dame star. But who are the guys you look at and you say the one or two guys that you say, if they can add these two guys, you're talking about having a linebacker class that's as good as any in the country?
Well, I'm not going to try to pronounce the name you're referring to.
Tuihalamaka. I'll do it. I've had to practice this, but it's Junior Tuihalamaka.
He is a pretty darn good player, and he's a lot like the two kids they have. He's a long kid. He can strike. He can play in the box. I think he's a little more versatile than some of the guys are giving him credit for. I think he can cover. He's just learning. And look, USC doesn't offer kids early in their backyard unless they really need to, because quite frankly, most of those kids want to grow up and play for USC. Getting him to flip from them is all, ironically, much like Burnham, kind of ironic, because everybody thought that kid, myself included, was just going to go to Michigan. I didn't watch his film early on because of that. Same with the kid you're talking about in California. Oh, he's just going to go to USC. They usually do. That kid can play Mike. He could probably play Will if you really wanted him to. And the 3-3-5 scheme, you'll have to explain that more. That's not my cup of tea. I don't know much about it yet, where he would play in it. But you got to have guys that can strike and play the run. Stanford again. They're going to play Michigan State in the future, teams like that. You got to have him. I still think he's a better in-the-box guy, but I'd love to have him. The other guy, there's two or three different players. Cheeks, obviously, out of Evanston, Illinois, basically Chicago, is one. And then the other, the Jackson kid out of Nebraska. They're a little bit different. I'd take either one of them and call it a day and be very happy. There are other kids as well that could play that, and it depends. When you say linebacker, do you include the quote-unquote rover position where number 6 played? If that's the case, that gets very interesting, because a lot of safeties can move there, and that's a really unique position and arguably the most difficult to recruit on defense now, because you need to be part corner and part D end. Good luck. But those are the main guys right there. Those three, they need to get 2 of those 3. Hopefully they can secure that before summer's out.
And we're also talking about, if they're able to get 2 of those 3, we're also talking about a situation, Brian, where they're pairing you with Prince Colley. That's the other thing, is that they're going to be on the same roster. And you talk about that rover position. I mean, to me, that was my highest graded Notre Dame defensive recruit last year.
He was my number 1 guy, period.
He's legit. I mean, you're talking about a linebacker that can rush for 1,900 yards as a senior. As a junior, played wide receiver, had over 60 catches for 1,000 yards. They just don't make guys like that very often. And Notre Dame's been fortunate. I'll give this staff, there's been different staffs, but they've been able to find those freaky guys. Obviously, Jalen Smith was in their backyard. That was a different story. Mike Elko went out and got Jeremiah Wusu-Koromoa. Clark Lee went out and found Prince Colley. And now, obviously, this group. But they're getting closer when it comes to that athleticism. But I think the difference between what this class needs to be, Brian, and what we've seen in the past is they've been able to land that one guy here and there. What we haven't seen them do is have, number one, back-to-back strong classes. And then the biggest part is having that one class that just loads you up with elite players, to where if you strike it big in this class, it not only impacts what you have on your roster, but even more important, Brian, it resets things the way that last year's cornerback class did, where now you're not worried about depth. You're saying, okay, who are the elite 1 or 2 guys that we can now go recruit and put all our focus on them? So once you restore the depth chart with the numbers and talent that you need, Now you're getting into it where your board doesn't have to be as big, and you can focus on now. The only guys we're recruiting next year are guys who can push the ones that we had in this class. And I think that's where Ohio State is. That's where Clemson is. That's where Alabama is. And now on defense, Notre Dame is getting closer and closer with last year's corner class, this year's potential linebacker class to getting to that point. What are your thoughts on that, Brian?
Hopefully this class does that. And like you said, Prince Colley is a very, very important player because he could play next year. It's not like they're loaded at the rover spot with experience. Jeremiah got all the reps for a good reason. But now you add guys behind him that can compete with him. You not only push him, but you have depth. I mean, injuries happen. It's football. It's part of the game. Notre Dame needs that depth, and they didn't take a lot of linebackers recently in the last couple of classes. You finalize all the depth, plus you're getting guys, I think, at the very least, like Burnham's going to play special teams from day one. He fits the role. He's the kamikaze going down on a punt or a kickoff. He's that guy. Hopefully they can get Jackson or they can get somebody else in that mold, but they can also get depth at all the spots. And when you do that by pushing the pile with true talent, not projects, it changes the outlook of the roster. It changes the attitude in the weight room. It changes your program. And then finally, just to kind of put it in perspective, I live in Tampa and I travel around Florida and Georgia all the time. Kids pay attention to that. They don't want to just go somewhere and be the guy. They want to be one of the guys. It matters. It goes back to when Pete Carroll was at USC and they kicked the crap out of everybody in recruiting. They had guys coming from Georgia, New Jersey and stuff because it was so different out there in the competition level. And they were talking about 4- and 5-star guys. Notre Dame's on that cusp, but you have to prove it. Now they're starting to kind of get in on those kids. But, like, if you do really well today, adding this player, then you get a couple more. The number one guy on my board is Rogers out of Mississippi, regardless of position, the corner, Kamari Rogers. It matters when he can look up and say, okay, who does Notre Dame have committed? Why would I want to go all the way from Mississippi to play in South Bend? You've got to have something different for a kid like that. Because he probably didn't even know what state Notre Dame was in, and I'm being dead serious, before recruiting started. Those kids down here, they don't know much about the northern schools. You have to be a little bit different. So having a lot of kids committed early that, hey, this kid's 4-star, this kid's borderline 5-star, they're going to look at that. I talk to these kids about it. It's not a news flash. It matters to them that you have big-time players already on board, because a recruitment like Rogers, just for instance, that's going to be a marathon, not a sprint. I don't care if he committed to Notre Dame today. Alabama's not going to stop calling.
LSU's not going to stop calling. All those schools, they're going to stay on him until signing day and then probably beyond. They're going to be on until he shows up. And to your point, Brian, I mean, you look at last year, they got Gabriel Rubio, who's a top 100 recruit at defensive tackle. They got Prince Colley, who's a top, SI All-American had him as the number 49. They had them both as top 50 players. Josh Burnham's a top 100 player. Tyson Ford, in my opinion, is a top 100 player. I think Aiden Gabera is going to end up being highly ranked, but right now he's not. But you add Junior Tuialamaka to the class. That's another top 100 linebacker. To your point, all of a sudden, Kamari Rogers and Xavier Nwankpa and Jair Brown are saying, what's going on up there at Notre Dame? Because I think there's something that's here's where Notre Dame is. To your point, football is a little different than basketball recruiting, because in basketball recruiting, one player can completely change the future of a program. And so you don't mind being the guy in basketball. In football, I had a parent one time of a 5-star recruit ask me why his son doesn't get as much attention on the big stages like the 5-star basketball players. And I said, because if a 5-star basketball player went to Oregon State's in the NCAA tournament next year. I said, if your son goes to Oregon State, they're still going to be terrible. He's going to be a 5-star player, but they're still going to be terrible. And so kids want to play with other great players. They want to win. They want to compete because they know their job is made harder when they're not surrounded by other great players, which is why you say that's why Alabama loads up every year. But where Notre Dame is, I think kids also are attracted to the notion of, I want to go be surrounded by other great players, but I want to do something that hasn't been done before. And I think that the more Notre Dame starts loading up on these kind of kids, and you start getting this mantra of, hey, we're going to be the group that's going to do something at Notre Dame. That, do you want to be the 8th title team at Alabama, or do you want to be the 1st title team at Notre Dame in 30 years? And I think there's something to that, but it requires those dominoes to fall. And to me, Josh Burnham is one of those dominoes that needs to fall to get the even bigger ones down the road that aren't from 4 or 5 hours away from South Bend like Josh Burnham is.
That's the difference. The kids down here where I live, again, and I'm not kidding when I say this, Most of them literally do not know what state Notre Dame is in. Literally. So you've got to do something to attract them beyond just sending them the pot of gold thing they're sending out today, which is cool, by the way. I love the idea. You've got to really recruit them all around. Whereas Alabama, it's pretty self-explanatory. They're always on TV. ESPN loves them. They kiss Nick Saban's feet, blah, blah, blah. Brian Kelly and Notre Dame are not on a network that is affiliated with ESPN. That hurts, whether people want to hear it or not. It hurts. I know Notre Dame doesn't want to hear that, but it's fact. And quite frankly, a lot of these kids don't have easy access to Notre Dame, even in a non-pandemic year, because they don't have money to get up there. So getting the kids closer to home to commit early, like last year, Blake Fisher was that guy. I mean, Blake's a tremendous player, no matter what state he was from.
Right.
But it helped that class, not only because he went out and recruited, but they're like, oh, wow, this guy could have went to Alabama. He could have went to Georgia. Why is he going to Notre Dame? It helped that class. That's what these kind of kids do as well. Again, if you can get a couple or more, whatever position you want, then you're having a better conversation with some of the kids in Florida, Texas, California that didn't know anything about Notre Dame prior, that the entire staff is after. Pick one. It doesn't matter which kid, but you have a much better chance at it. And Notre Dame's today is one of the most unique days, in my opinion, in Notre Dame football recruiting history because of what they're doing and getting after the scout. I've been complaining.
We've never seen this before with this big of a jump. You and I, Brian, you and I have known each other for over 20 years, and we've been talking about this. Notre Dame is way too late, constantly getting involved with 2023 kids. And the thing about today is it wasn't just a cool social media push. We talked about this on the channel earlier. It wasn't just, hey, we sent out a bunch of cool tweets. They sent out a bunch of offers. Those offers don't happen because they look at a rivals list or a 247 list. Oh, that guy's ranked high. They've done their research. They've looked at the film. They've looked at the transcripts. They're getting a legitimate early start with these kids. And you have to do that to get these top players, to get that 2-3 guys a year that are different. And I think the other key thing that's happening now, and last year was part of it, and this year is too, is you have to recruit your base better. To your point of, you have to get the Blake Fishers. You have to get the Rocco Spindlers. You have to be willing to go up into Michigan and beat Michigan for a top 100 recruit, which that was a battle Notre Dame sometimes wouldn't even fight. You have to be willing to go into Ohio and battle Ohio State for Lorenzo Styles. You have to. And you start getting those guys, that's where that foundation comes from that makes it more attractive to. And Prince Colley's another example. Tennessee's, I consider, a base state for Notre Dame because it is so close. He can get in his car and just drive up to Notre Dame for a visit if you need to. And they were able to be so successful recruiting those areas last year with highly ranked guys that it now sets them up on a stage where now you can maybe expand a little bit. They're going out to California a lot more. This, Brian, we've talked about this. California, Texas, and the Southwest are getting way more attention since Mike Elson's took over as recruiting coordinator. Notre Dame basically gave up on Florida for like 4 years. I mean, essentially, if you weren't from a private school in Florida, they weren't going to waste their time with you, with the exception of really Joe Wilkins. They're going after a lot more kids in the state of Florida now. So this is a staff, to me, especially on defense, that is far more willing to say, I don't care who you've been offered by. I don't care who you're committed to. They're trying to flip a kid from Ohio State, for Pete's sake. This staff, in my opinion, especially on defense, will battle. And that's so important because you're going to lose most of them. But that's how you get that one or two different kind of cats that can take you over the edge. Burnham is step one, and now get you one step closer to the next group of guys that can truly get this program over the hump, at least defensively. Well, offensively, we'll see. At least defensively, they're on the cusp, Brian. They just got to close. And today is, to me, an example of that next step, not just the pot of gold, but also being able to go into Michigan's backyard and beat them for a kid they wanted. That's big time, a top 100 kid they wanted.
I'm sure Michigan people are not very happy. And by the way, they're not going to stop recruiting Josh, but nor should they. But with that being said, here's something to kind of look at and just an educational point, whether you've followed recruiting or not. Again, I live in Tampa, and in Florida, it is very niche. Every town is different. It is the most unique state in the country of recruits. And you take Florida and put it aside. It's an anomaly. But with that being said, when you get a kid from a state, whatever state you want to put, the other good players in that state will know them. They may or may not like them, but they will know them. And they're going to tweet with them and all this, but they talk on the phone, they talk on Twitter. And the question is simple. Why? And fill in the blank for a school. If Notre Dame gets their foot in the door in Ohio, like what they did last year with Styles, it'll have an impact for 2 or 3 years because that's a kid Ohio State flat out wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing if you get a kid from Alabama, a kid from Louisiana, whatever it is. When you get a kid from an area you're not traditionally getting players from, it sets an example. And then it's up to the staff to go into that state again and again and again, and then you build upon it. Just as an example, Alabama, their biggest rival, I know that's Auburn technically, but really it's LSU because Auburn isn't as good as LSU talent-wise. They've been killing LSU in the state of Louisiana. And it agitates LSU people to the end of the earth because that state used to be about the most loyal. Well, they got 1 or 2 and they were successful. Well, it just so happens that the Heisman Trophy winner this past year is from Louisiana and grew up about an hour from Baton Rouge. I'm sure that really irritates LSU people, but it's just because of persistence.
Mm-hmm.
They were getting killed in recruiting against LSU forever, but they didn't give up. They did it anyway. Is it fun? No.
Yeah.
Did they do it anyway? Yes. Notre Dame is starting to do that. And to a level, it's not just here or there, it's consistently.
Mm-hmm.
Florida kids, again, are starting to be recruited, although in spots. Again, Florida is very unique culture-wise. A lot of the kids don't fit Notre Dame from Florida, but there's plenty of private school kids, and there's some good public school kids, too. Caleb Johnson is just one of them. A lot of kids moved down here. He's from Indiana, really. It says Ocala, but he's from Fort Wayne. The point is this. You can find them if you look and you research it, and then you just find the fits for you. Every program's different. Wake Forest recruits different kids, Alabama, Notre Dame, Tennessee, whatever. Notre Dame can get kids in states where they have a dominant team. Notre Dame's private. They've got tradition. I mean, they got the network, et cetera. You can at least get your foot in the door. Then it's just sheer effort on the staff. What you were talking about with the defensive guys, that myth about Notre Dame can't get elite defensive players is garbage.
Mm-hmm.
They can. It's about relationships with players, between player and coach. Notre Dame staff on defense especially is as good as any in the country at making an effort. They're showing it. They're getting players. They're setting up visits. Why not just do that every year? Now, I'm going to guess that's going to be the case with the 2 new guys on staff, that they have the right people in place. I expect Notre Dame's defensive recruiting to be absolutely similar to the Holtz era from 88 to 93.
2017 to 2019 classes, Notre Dame signed 1 player from the state of Michigan. That was Ovia Gofu. 1.
That's terrible.
This year, the last 2 years, they've already got 3. And again, they're not 3-star guys. Nolan Ziegler is to me a top 200 recruit. Josh Burnham, to me, top 100. You're top 200. I think you're more going off of kind of where he is now. I'm looking more at the upside, which we both agree on. And then, of course, you have Rocco Spindler, who's a top 100 recruit. So it's not only you going into the backyard of Michigan and getting just guys, you're getting guys, you're getting dudes. And that's really the important thing, Brian. And like you mentioned in Florida, you're going to have to look through 100 prospects to get the 2 that you have a shot to get. It takes work. And this staff so far is showing a willingness to work. And that is something that's impressive. And I want to bring up a couple things. We have one question for you, but this is to your point, Brian. This Searcher Green 9. I think being a higher academic school is becoming more of a positive than it used to be. Young men or their parents seem to be looking at it more. And I completely agree where he's coming from with that question. But this is something you and I have gone back and forth with, not against each other, but there have always been kids who care about academics. But these kids want to go to a place where they can compete for a championship. If your major is football, right, and your future goal is to be a millionaire playing football, I don't care how much you value academics, you're going to go somewhere that can make you a millionaire playing football. And that's the thing for Notre Dame, is they have to prove that they can do that for players. And as they've done that and they put in the work and they take those battles, then these kids who, like Christian Wilkins is a perfect example, went to Clemson and in 5 years won 2 national championships and also graduated with 2 degrees. He went to a very good private school in Connecticut. He was a kid who cared about academics, but he also cared about being a first-round NFL draft pick. And at the time, Clemson was doing that and Notre Dame wasn't. And so now you're starting to see, as you get Jalen Smith, you get, Drew Tranquil and Tavon Coney and now Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah. Now all of a sudden, people are saying you can be successful playing linebacker at Notre Dame. Well, it's not a surprise that after that kind of run, now you're seeing Prince Colley come. You're seeing Josh Burnham. You're seeing Nolan Ziegler. You're seeing all these guys be more interested in Notre Dame. And then you bring in Marcus Freeman, who is a dynamic recruiter, something Clark Lee was not. Brilliant defensive coordinator, brilliant linebacker coach, not a great recruiter. Now you've got that perfect storm, and you've got 2 playoff appearances in 3 years, Brian. You've got that perfect storm now for Notre Dame to where this is your chance to now get those kids. There's been kids like that out there, but now's your chance to get them. That's my take on that situation.
Well, I'll give you an example. Notre Dame, I re-offered or sent out one of the pot of golds today to a kid I know. He plays at Jacksonville Trinity Christian. He committed as a freshman in high school to Georgia to play running back. If you follow college football, you have an idea that really nobody recruits running back better than Georgia. So for him to even get an offer at that point is important. Notre Dame is going after him, and they re-upped with him. He has an offer from practically every school. For Notre Dame to even go after a kid that's committed to Georgia as a freshman, and then he's a running back, tells me that they've kind of changed their culture. Plus, he's a Florida kid. Like you said, they kind of backed off, had a lot of problems with kids off the field of Florida. He's a good kid, goes to a private school, plays for one of the most legendary coaches in Dixie. That's a kid you have to recruit. Again, you got to pick your spots. And having the success they're having on defense is only going to help this year and next. He's a 23 kid, not a 22. He'll go to whatever school he wants. He'll have 50 offers. Those are the kind of kids that you make an impact with when you continuously and tirelessly recruit them. You're not going to get that kid just because you got the golden helmet. That kid could care less. And I know a lot of old-time fans do not want to hear that, but today's they do not care. What have you done for me lately? Notre Dame is not in that boat. Therefore, you got to outwork Alabama, which is not very easy. Alabama and Georgia and Florida and all of them, they're still going to hammer this kid. That's just one example, but Notre Dame did a great job. They've got the door open with him, communicates, etc. That's a kid I'm going to go check out again. Great player. And it just is a microcosm of what Notre Dame can do. If you just get one kid like Trayon a year out of Florida, changes your offense. Yeah. He's an every down SEC back. Not a lot of those guys hanging out that can get into Notre Dame academically. Cannot stop recruiting.
Brian, I got a question for you here from Jason. He says, Smitty, can you talk about the academics at IMG? Obviously, Indy has pulled some kids from there, but what is the culture and academics like at that football factory? Brian, you've spent a lot of time at IMG, so I think this is a perfect question for you.
I worked at IMG for a little while. It's very, very complex. Here's the 20-second answer. It's a dorm setup. It's a prep school, etc., and the academics are fine. If you want really good academics, you can challenge yourself as much or as little as you want and get your degree. They set things up differently because your major is football when you go there to play football. But they make sure you go and you're eligible, etc. Bobby Acosta is the coach there now. He was at Syracuse as an assistant. Great dude. The point is this. Their weight room and everything and their culture is different than any place on the planet. I'm not kidding when I say the following. Their second weight room, not their first, their second weight room, which is put up by Under Armour, they are an Under Armour school, is better than most colleges. And I'm not kidding. It's insane. I lifted at that second gym and it was just insane. The first one I felt weird walking into. So the culture for a kid there, the advantage they have is if they go to Alabama, USC, Notre Dame, they're walking into the same thing. I expect IMG kids, not only because they have NFL coaches, guys that played in the league coaching them, but because what they walk around with on campus every day and everything else to be a little bit different because there is no culture shock. Some of the kids, like a kid that play 3A football here in Florida, he's still playing against good competition, but the weight room he walks into every day is junk. Florida does not support their players from a standpoint of facilities. It's something I've been pushing really
You're talking
hard.
about the high school level, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, Florida. I mean, University of Florida has every advantage you can known to man. But the point is still the same. They're going to walk right into a college. Doesn't matter which one. No problem at all, and they're going to be fine. Academically, it's fine too. But football-wise, it's unbelievable. They have 20 D1 kids in their senior class every year. So they're used to playing against great kids in practice, and they're challenged in practice a lot more. They beat Edgewater last year, who's been the state runner-up 2 years in a row to St. Thomas Aquinas. They were playing their B guys pretty much at the end, and they won by 40. By 40.
That doesn't happen to Edgewater.
I mean, Edgewater's got guys, their star player just signed with Alabama. They lost by over 40, and they were trying to end the game to get it over with.
Right.
So that's how good IMG is.
Brian, here's another question for you. Just looking for clarity from Michael Morris. He wants to know what do you mean about the ESPN comment? Notre Dame's on TV every week talking about NBC. He wants to know what we're missing. And there's a difference between NBC and ESPN. And because we're not talking about for us as fans. We're talking about
for recruits,
for young players. So explain that, what you mean by the difference between ESPN and NBC when you talk about being on TV every week.
The kids that we talk about on this show and you read on any site, they're going to watch ESPN first. NBC doesn't have College Game Day. ESPN does. ESPN knows that they're not going to air Notre Dame home games ever. They can say whatever they want publicly, but we all know that they shy away from talking about Notre Dame. Where do they talk about things? The teams that they go and watch the most. ABC.
Unless it's taking a shot at Notre Dame. They do like doing that.
Yeah. A lot of those, like Desmond hates Notre Dame. He played at Michigan. It's just, and that's, I get it. But at the same time, there's no love for Notre Dame on that show, and that hurts Notre Dame recruiting. It is not good. NBC doesn't have any show like that. I don't know why they don't have a college football show. They could add pick up the Mac, do something, add something. It would help Notre Dame and be good for college football, but they don't. Nobody watches NBC for football unless the actual game is on for the Irish. That's it. So Notre Dame being on is not very helpful. Kids, when they turn on Saturday, if they watch, the first thing they're going to click is ESPN. Period. So anything that ESPN does is good for those programs, and Notre Dame is not one of those.
And the reason we say these things is because we talk to these kids.
Oh,
I mean, that's Brian's job. It's his. There's somebody asking how you know what channels they watch because you talk to them constantly. That's your job.
Florida Georgia kids every.
That's your job.
Day. Yeah.
And again, when you talk about Florida, it's a complaint here about some of the weight rooms. There are a few schools like Aquinas, like IMG, but the majority of schools are not that way. I've recruited that state as well. So,
they're very raw from a physical standpoint. They, Benny Serrato told me once they eat like crap and they run track. Those are the two things that Florida kids do, and he's right. Like literally, the kids down here, a lot of the coaches will find ways for them to be fed at night. Literally, because the poverty is so high and they want them to have something. They take up community donations and everything else for these kids to eat. That's how bad it is. So
let's go through a few more questions here, Brian, and then we'll wrap this up. We have a question from Facebook. Do you think Notre Dame can close and make this a top 5 class? Last year they were number 1 at one point and everyone else caught up. Look, Notre Dame. No, look, here's the thing about this top 5 class. I don't really care about it being ranked top 5 by 247 or rivals. And this isn't a shot at them. It's just those rankings are meant to there's just enough to me issues with those. I mean, Clemson's had 2 top 5 classes in the last 6 years. I mean, the class with Trevor Lawrence wasn't even ranked top 10. Why? Because you have to have X number of players and you get X number of points and they don't evaluate. Did you meet needs? You might assign 5 receivers and 0 offensive linemen. To me, Notre Dame doesn't need that, especially with geographically some of the areas they recruit where you're just going to have more overlooked players. What we care more about is that Notre Dame is landing guys when we pop on the film is an impact player. A case in point, if Xavion Bradshaw commits to Notre Dame, that's needle moving. He's a difference maker. He's a 3-star recruit because he hasn't been in any camps. Right? He's from out in Western Virginia, my state, and he's border. I think it's West Virginia or Tennessee, one of those 2 states he borders on. He's closer to those cities than he is any big city in Virginia. Nobody really knew about this guy. Notre Dame has got on him early. I don't care what the ranking says. I care what the film says. And what the film tells me, that's a difference maker. It's like when Notre Dame got Kyle Hamilton. Remember, when he committed to Notre Dame, he was a 3-star recruit. Yeah. We kept saying that he ain't a 3-star recruit, and then it was all said and done. Most outlets came around. I think 247 had as a 5-star. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is another guy. So it's about landing the impact talent. It's about not getting 1 Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. It's about getting 3. And some of those guys will be 5-stars. Some of those impact players will be ready-made to step on the football field as freshman guys. They're going to have those guys. But to me, it's just about getting players with very high ceilings. And I think that what I like from Notre Dame right now is not that they're going after Kamari Rogers because he's ranked in the top 50. It's that they're going after Kamari Rogers because he has elite talent. If he was a 3-star and the number 30 player in the state of Mississippi, I'd still feel the same way that I do now. Yeah. That's the key. And yes, it's nice to get those 5 stars, and it's nice to have that top 5 class, and that's important. But at the end of the day, it's about landing difference makers. And Josh Burnham, whether he's ranked 85th or 285th, he's a difference maker. He has the athleticism to be that kind of player. Whether Xavier Bradshaw's recruiting ranking goes up or not does not change his talent. Prince Colley's talent didn't change when he started getting ranked higher. It's just more of a recognition of what he can do, more exposure. That's what it was. And so, do I think they can have a top 5 class? Sure, they have a shot, but I'm not worried about that. What I'm worried about is landing impact players, and more importantly, landing impact players at the positions where right now they are not landing enough of those guys. That's why we talked so much about corner. That's why we talk so much about edge players. That's why we talk so much about receivers, those players that are, you're getting some of them, you got to play them, but you need to not get, Xavier Watts and Jordan Johnson 1 year. You need to get those guys every single year. And that's where Notre Dame has got to get to. And that's what's encouraging about this current recruiting operation, is because they're going to miss on some of these guys we talk about, but they're going to keep fighting. They're going to keep battling, and they're going to start getting them. And to me, that is the thing that is the difference, because Notre Dame is not 8-9 guys away from beating Alabama. They're like 2. They're 2 or 3. You give them a Devontae Smith type of receiver, you give them a Joe Burrow type quarterback, or you give them an elite edge rusher, and all of a sudden that game's going to look a little bit different. We've talked about this in 2018. If you just switch Ian Book and Trevor Lawrence, and I don't mean any disrespect to Ian Book, Trevor Lawrence is a generational quarterback. You switch quarterbacks on those 2 teams, that game looks a whole lot different.
Absolutely.
A whole lot different. And so that's why I say, they have to start getting those couple guys a year. And you could even say maybe it's a couple guys on each side of the ball each year, but you have to start getting those types of guys. So here you want to hear a blast from the past, Brian? Here you go. Searcher Green says, I haven't let myself get excited about verbal commitments since Omar Hunter. This feels weird. That was a tough one.
Well,
that was a tough one. Yeah.
Well, I mean, he was one of the best nose guard prospects I'd ever watched Notre Dame recruit, and then he, to get the rug pulled out from underneath you. So I feel your pain there. I'll never forget that one either. But on your point with Xavier, I mean, you're talking about guys that can change the game outside the hash. When Notre Dame played the Crimson Tide, they were depantsed outside the hash, period. That can change when you get guys like that every single year. Devontae, the player that everybody was just so happy to see do well. He's a great kid and everything. He was a top 100 recruit. Again, he's a Louisiana guy, that Alabama guy. But he wasn't even necessarily their best offensive player in that class. That's scary, but he was ranked like number 60 or number
62. Yeah. He was not a 5-star recruit.
And he was a twig. He was 160 pounds. But he's
really about the same size now that he was in height. That's a crazy thing. I remember seeing him at the opening, Brian, and looking at him and being like, he hasn't changed much. But he was, he was maybe $155, $160 back in high school.
But he's a kid. They taught him how to do different things. Obviously, he just played at a generic public school in Louisiana. They coached him up, and he was very eager to learn. The more of those bullets you have in your gun, the more likely you are to have somebody go to New York City for the Heisman ceremony. It's that simple. It's math. Notre Dame just needs more bullets.
That receiver class was just stupid. It was Devontae Smith, Henry Ruggs, and Jerry Jeudy were all in that class.
The class they just signed might be as good.
On paper, it's got a shot to be. It might even be better on paper. On paper, it might be better. We'll see if it ends up being that, but it's really good. Flipping that early kid from LSU was huge, but we won't dive into there. We'll stick to Notre Dame. So let's just see if there's any more questions here, any more comments, Brian, before we wrap up. Really appreciate y'all being with us. Appreciate the questions. If you have any more, here you go, Brian. Here's a little love for you from technician bonus. Brian Smith is unbelievable, very knowledgeable. All right. T. Stewart, is he set up to be an early enrollee? I don't know the answer to that yet. I think a lot of that stuff is going to be up in the air with some of these kids who haven't visited campus in a while, and things are a little bit different. So we'll
I wonder what Notre Dame is going to do, because a lot of these kids, they didn't even get to go to class forever.
Mm-hmm.
Notre Dame's not going to like that, but to be competitive in football, you just got to grit your teeth and let it. That'll be a fight that the athletic department will have to fight with admissions, etc.
Yeah, and admissions has worked with Notre Dame's football program a lot in recent years.
Yeah,
They've done a
it, bro.
lot.
They've
Yeah,
done much better, much better.
yeah. So let's see if we got any more. Yeah, this is, I think, especially when that rival is Michigan.
Yeah.
I've said this before. I don't hate USC. I guess it's because I grew up in an era where Notre Dame just dominated USC. I don't like USC, but I don't hate them. Michigan, I have a strong dislike for.
I feel the same. It's more of a fan thing. It's nothing against the players.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fan
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
I think
But-
it's great. Anytime we get a player from Michigan that's a really good football player,
Yeah.
for me personally, elevated.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a rival, even though they are a basketball school. It is fun to to go against them, huh?
They are definitely now.
Yeah, they have a
Howard.
basketball player on their football uniform. I mean, do we need to say anything else?
That's right.
Let's see here. Last couple questions. I believe that is it. Okay, here we go. Cardinal Tate told my guy he's visiting Notre Dame this weekend. It wouldn't surprise me. I think there are some guys that little scoop. I believe Dallin Hayden is going to be on campus this weekend for an unofficial visit. Obviously, Notre Dame cannot invite these kids. I don't think that Notre Dame is. I mean, they're not able to meet these kids, but I think these kids are wanting to come to campus and check things out. But I think Dallin Hayden might be on campus this weekend too. We'll see. Jason asks, have you talked to Cardinal Tate at IMG? Came from Chicagoland this year. Go ahead, Brian.
I've been around him, but he plays for Midwest Boom, and that's the premier program in the Midwest for 7-on-7. That's my area. I don't know him personally, but I'm told by people that know him that Notre Dame's the team to beat. Eric
Rudder, for our new recruiting analyst, interviewed him a couple weeks ago, and if Notre Dame keeps pushing for him, Tommy Rees is all over him. That's a good thing. And so Notre Dame is, to me, going to have to either stop recruiting him or do something at this point in time to not get him.
He stood out as a 15-year-old.
Yeah.
With their 15U team. I asked one of the guys, like, who's that guy? And he said, that's our next one. That was last year.
Yeah.
He blew up like a month or so later. So
and I believe he was high school teammates before going to IMG with Pat Coogan. I believe.
I think you're right.
Wasn't he? He went to Marist, right? I think. I could be wrong on that, but I believe he was. So, Kenny, I hear you, man. I hear you. So that's what makes this commitment even more fun for people like Kenny.
I hate Michigan.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, hey, Brian, thanks for joining the show. I appreciate it. We will be on tomorrow. I already recorded an interview actually with John Garcia where we broke down Jaden Mickey. We broke down Josh Burnham, and then we talked about 5 of the prospects that Notre Dame are the secondary, second and third level players. We talked about Junior Tuihalamaka, Kamari Rogers, Jair Smith. Talked about Jaden Mangum, and we talked about Devin Moore. So, Brian, when I get John on, I got to talk DBs. I got to do it.
Well, that's his thing. He's very good.
That's his baby. So we talked about that. So we'll have that tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that. We'll have a Friday live mailbag. I'm sure there'll be a lot of recruiting questions on that. And that'll be it. So make sure you stay locked into irishbreakdown.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and please hit the notification button so you get live updates and when we post a show. And wherever you listen to your podcasts, sign up and subscribe to the Irish Breakdown podcast. So thank you all for joining us. We had a huge crowd today. This was great. I want to see all of y'all in the show on Friday. We'll have a live show on Friday. We'll answer all your questions. It'll be me and Vince. Be back together, and appreciate you all being with us. Brian, thank you again for joining me on today's show.
Absolutely.
Everybody have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to y'all tomorrow.